Guardian Angel, an Angelica Dale mystery by P.K. Armstrong. Chapter 14. Angel's mother, Francine Dale, Ph.D., was a clinical psychologist who specialized in interventions, including talk therapy. Human behavior intrigued her, and often you could find her studying the latest research on abnormalities of the mind and any new interventions she could implement in the treatment plans of her patients. As a child, teenager, and young adult, having a parent who studied human behavior could have been disastrous for Angel. Later in life, she discovered there were a lot of times her mother could have called her out for those childhood indiscretions, but didn't. Her mother often let her find her way, overlooking little white lies and class stitching as normal behavior for a child testing her boundaries. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you ask, her mother's parenting partner was her father, Jerry Dale, a 30-year veteran of Filmore PD. Angel remembered there were many a time she watched a vein throbbing on the side of her father's neck while he was trying to control strong, putting it mildly, feelings about her mother's child-rearing techniques. But he was, and still is, her mother's perfect counterbalance. Her father was always there for her, chasing the boogeyman away from under her bed, cheering her on in sports, and running background checks on her boyfriends. Angel was now sitting in her mother's kitchen, having a cup of coffee. "Why don't you let me fix you some eggs?" "I've had breakfast, Mom." Those blueberry scones smell good." Angel looked expectantly at her mother. Francine smiled and stacked the scones on a plate and poured Angel some more coffee. "I should tell your father you're here. You haven't been here in weeks. I'll go out to the garage after we talk." "So," Francine smiled knowingly as she sat down across from her, "what's the case?" Angel jumped right in. "You know I've done quite a bit of work for Ella Sinclair." Her mother nodded. "She asked me to look into the assault on a seventh grader. She was attacked on campus." Her mother shook her head. "I read about that in the paper. It was appalling." Angel nodded and continued. "I've interviewed her, the child, Violet, and of course she was very frightened, nervous, and agitated. What's confusing me is her mother, Brandy." The thought of her visit with Brandy and Violet stirred her ire once again. "One thing my conversation cleared up for me is that the attack was not random. Violet was targeted. I was at the school this week when Violet returned." "Already?" Francine interrupted in shock. "I know, right? Anyway, Violet ran off at school and returned to the scene where her attack took place. She was heaving and vomiting, crying, and she couldn't breathe. I calmed her down, but she said something interesting. She asked, 'What did I ever do to him?' referring to her attacker." "Somebody has it in for that little girl." Angel paused, letting her conclusion sink in. "The only suspect we've had so far is a junkie, and I'm beginning to wonder if we are looking in the wrong place." Francine looked at Angelica. "Why the wrong place?" "Like I said, it's mainly the interview with her mother, Brandy. She said things like, 'That child thinks too much of herself, and she's just trying to get out of her chores.' Even Violet said that her mom said since she messed up, she wouldn't be allowed to return to school because she obviously didn't appreciate being allowed to go to Sinclair." Violet's response is textbook. Partially. Her physical reaction is what many victims experience, and she will relive the attack for months, and in some cases years to come. The one inconsistency, her returning to the scene of the crime, could actually be an indication that her attack was more personal, i.e., she knew her attacker. Angel's temper was dampening as the reality of what she had already concluded began to sink in. Francine wasn't drinking her coffee but staring out into space, a sure sign the analytical mind was churning. Focusing her eyes on Angel, she asked, "Does Brandy have a rap sheet?" Angel got up to retrieve her bag from the floor in front of the entry table where she had dropped it and removed the file Detective Roland had given to her. "Actually, she does. Let's see. Hindering a police investigation, blackmail, fraud, forgery, and the most serious charge, firearms possession." She passed the file to her mother. Francine began drinking her coffee again while reading the reports on Brandy's past misdeeds. "Without having a session with her, my tentative diagnosis would be narcissism with grandiose idealization. To Violet's mother, Brandy, the whole world knows how important she is and teems with jealousy. They will do anything to make her fail. In fact, all the bad things that happen to her are someone else's fault, or their attempt to steal her limelight. So she doesn't even care what happened to her daughter? She actually thinks that Violet planned the whole thing to get attention? Angel asked incredulously. It depends. At first, she may have acted concerned because the obvious assault on her daughter garnered attention for herself. The police, along with social services, probably attempted to do another interview with Violet? Angel nodded. Then you show up asking to speak with Violet. Now Brandy realizes that Violet is receiving more of the attention, so she becomes jealous. That is ridiculous, Angel replied. And then after a moment's thought, but Brandy's weird behavior shouldn't be throwing off my ability to come up with the correct narrative. Francine smiled lovingly at her daughter's frustration. She and her father were so much alike. When it came to investigations, neither had any time for things they couldn't control and refused to accept there were some things that had no logical explanation. Francine smiled again, shook her head in a sympathetic way, and at the same time let out a small sigh. Angel rolled her eyes and groaned inwardly. Every time her mother looked at her and her father that way, they knew she was about to school them in basic human behavior. Her next words would be so simple and make her feel like no matter how long she lived, she would never catch up. Angel, you went to Brandy's home to interview Violet, right? Yes. And you were shocked by Brandy's seeming disinterest. You expected her to demand, who did this to my child? Exactly. But did you ever ask her the same question? Angel walked out the back door and followed the path to her dad's workshop. She stopped briefly en route, surveying the landscaping her parents had recently begun undertaking. Lined up against the fence was a wall of small bushes still in their pots. A pile of organic ground cover, protected by a tarp, was off to the corner of the yard. She smiled to herself when she saw her mother had won. Large decorative rocks, the size of small boulders, were piled into another corner. Angel was over for family dinner one night when her parents tried to get her to take sides between the natural beauty of boulders versus the clean lines of manufactured bricks. As she got closer to the door of the workshop, she smelled the familiar odor of sawdust and wood stain and heard the rhythmic movement of the sander. She paused briefly in the doorway and glanced around. A clutter-free workbench lined three of the walls. On each of the walls, tools were hung in specific places according to use, then size. In the center was a custom-designed island, which is where her father worked on his latest project, a crib attachment for a bed. How come we never co-slept as a family? Angel asked. Her father kept standing. How do you know we didn't co-sleep? I don't remember it. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. Angel laughed softly and then said belatedly, Hey, Dad. She moved in for a hug, and her father put his sander down and embraced her and planted a kiss on her temple. He took two side steps, reaching for a stool he reserved for when he had guests. Jerry Warren Dale was a good cop. He was what some would call a cop's cop, and it was a reputation that he was proud of. After a brief stint in the Marines, at the age of 18, he joined the Filmore PD and quickly made a name for himself with his quick thinking, swift response, and community rapport. It was 12 years ago that Jerry Dale was called out on a domestic disturbance. A husband and father of two had broken emotionally and held his wife and their two small children hostage in the family SUV in the driveway in the front of their home. Jerry Dale spoke with the man for 5 hours before he agreed to let his children go. That's when things went wrong. The wife, not wanting to be alone in the car with her husband, used the moment her kids got out of the car to escape. Jerry Dale saw the husband take aim and put himself in the path of the bullet. The bullet struck Jerry Dale in the back, just above his iliac crest, through the external oblique muscle, and lodged in his descending colon. After surgery and physical therapy, he had recovered from the initial injury, but the damage to his colon was extensive enough to cause problems. He and Francine decided he would retire. He still participated in his community, working with men who had been convicted of domestic violence and ordered by the court to complete therapy. But his main occupation was whatever building and crafting projects requested by friends, family, and ex-coworkers. Angel sat on the stool provided by her father, breathing in the smell of wood and varnish, and relaxed. The sights and smells of her father's workshop always enveloped around her like a warm blanket, soothing her. How many times had she sat right here on this very stool and received a lecture, discipline, or comfort after some seemingly horrible crisis occurred in her young life? "Hey, baby girl, what are you up to?" "Working on a case." Did your mom help?" Her father pulled out another stool and sat just as her mother arrived with the tray of iced tea. She smiled lovingly at them both and put the tray down and exited without a word. Angel's father handed her one of the glasses and leaned on his stool. He looked at her expectantly. "Well?" Angel told him about her case. Except for a brief flash of anger when she explained the assault on Violet, he said nothing until she finished. "What did your mother say?" "That I'm not asking the right question." He snorted slightly. Typical. He drank some of his tea with a thoughtful expression on his face. "That mother? What's her name?" "Brandy." "Brandy? She is not telling you everything. Sounds like she may know more, even who did it." "Yeah, that's what I think. But as Mom pointed out, I don't think I'm asking her the right questions." Her father shrugged. "Sometimes we can push something too hard, too fast, and a witness can close up." He took another drink. "But sometimes pushing is all we have got, if the case stalls. Maybe it's time you did a little pushing?" Angel nodded, having come to that conclusion herself. She looked up and her father was giving her a strange look. "So what do you think of Roland?" Angel's breath caught in surprise. "What? What do you know about Roland? Why did I just go through my case if you already knew everything?" Her father held up his hand to stop her headlong rush into indignation. "I didn't know about your case. I just knew you had been to the station to speak with Roland." He paused with a smirk. "On a couple of occasions." He looked directly at her and smiled when she looked away. "You're acting guilty. Have you been out on a date with him or something?" Angel took in a deep breath and tried to appear unmoved by his inquiry. "We were reviewing the case," she replied, and then abruptly, "I've got to go." She put her glass down on the tray and made for the door while enduring her father's knowing chuckles. He had picked up his sander again and started to sand. Angel turned with her hand on the door. "Dad?" "Hmm?" He didn't look up. "If I did go out with him, would you mind?" This time he did look up. "No, babe, not at all."